I'm here with Incident Commander Daniel Klein to talk to you about what's going to be happening on the Lladnar Creek wildfire operationally over the next few days. So Daniel, can you please talk to me about what is being planned over the next 2-3 days?
Yeah, you bet, Kim. First, I'll just say I'm joining from the Sparwood Rec Center. That's where our incident command post is set up. So that's my background here. What I'll do is I'll share my screen. I'll give people just an overview of what's going on in the fire, and then we can jump into the details of what's planned for the next couple of days here. So stand by.
Wonderful, thanks, Dan. So what we're seeing here, yeah, I'm ready.
Okay, and I just want to confirm you guys are seeing the screen on my end.
Yep, it's all good.
Okay, perfect. So this is the kind of current shape of the wildfire. The orange is the polygon and the shape of it currently. You can see it's back down the ridge, about 5 kilometers south of Sparwood, right across from the Sparwood transfer station is the southern extent of the fire. The northern extent is slightly into the Cummings drainage to the north of the community. This kind of solid straight line on the east flank is where the fire has kind of burnt down to the transmission lines, and that's where we were doing some planned ignitions previously over the last week before we got some rain and cooler weather. So currently what's happening on the fire, we do have some heat on the southeast corner of the incident, and we also have some heat in the kind of north here trickling down to Cummings Creek. Fire behavior has been decreased over the last number of days, partly because we had a bit of rain that came through and some cooler temperatures. And the total rainfall amounts that we received during that time were really only between 5 and 8 mils across the entire incident. So it was enough to calm things down. Probably if people are living in the area or driving through the corridor, they would have seen that there was really only rank 1, rank 2 fire behavior. A couple pockets of visible smoke, but for the most part, over the last 5-6 days, there hasn't been a lot of activity. Now, that is changing as of yesterday with some of the heat that we're starting to build into over the next couple days that are forecasted. We did start to see some increased activity in the southeast corner, mainly in these gully features that have a lot of fuel accumulations, and some aspect change to the south that receive a little bit more daytime heating. We are expecting that to become more and more active over the next couple days. So forecasted, weather, including daytime temperatures, are supposed to go back up into the low 30s. We're supposed to see unseasonably warm and dry conditions. We're expecting relative humidities to drop down into the teens, 15 to kind of 20%. And what that's going to do is that's going to increase our fire behavior again. And we're going to start to see more smoke in the air. We're going to see more pockets of higher intensity on this fire. Given that we're going into a really hot and dry period here, and also that we're starting to see forecasts at the end of next week that we may have some really windy conditions. The combination of a hot and dry spell and followed up by potentially strong winds has us slightly concerned about what this fire could do if we don't contain it and bring it down to places that are manageable for us to mop up and have people extinguish the perimeter of the fire. So that being said, we are moving forward with some planned ignitions on the south end of the fire. What I'm going to do is just pull up a couple layers here for folks so that we can understand it better. This green layer are control lines that have been constructed along the south flank of the fire. We are using the hydro line on the east here. We've reopened the hydro access road with heavy equipment. And then on due south here, there's a combination of heavy equipment and ground crews that have constructed guards across the ridge here, tying into the Lladnar drainage and some Forest Service roads on the west face here. So all the green lines are our control lines that have been completed and constructed by crews and heavy equipment. Now, the second layer that I want to bring up is our uh, proposed planned ignition area. So the total area here we're looking at is about 300 to 350 hectares. Now, the reason that we're doing this planned ignition, like I talked about, is that we're trying to bring the fire out of inaccessible steep terrain where we can't do anything about it to an area where we bring it down to guards where it's safe for crews to be able to action it. And so by bringing it down to where we can action it, we can actually have some control over making sure that we contain this fire before we get this really hot, dry weather and winds at the end of next week. So we're bringing it into a location that's advantageous for us to suppress rather than running the risk of this fire being in locations that we can't do anything about it with, and some really some hot, dry weather and windy conditions that we're expecting over the next week.
That makes a lot of sense, Dan. As we know, we've been speaking to this community about pretty regularly. The steepness of the slope, the terrain, it's unable to directly attack it, and so yeah, this does make sense. We know that an increase in fire activity, we know that an increase in smoke can be uncomfortable and unsettling for the surrounding areas. So why is it important that we do this, and is there an alternative?
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for that question. It's a really good question, and how I would answer that is smoke is going to be present whether we do the planned ignitions or not. If we leave this fire where it currently is, where we don't have it contained on these steep slopes, with hot, dry weather, it's going to continue to burn, and it's going to increase in fire behavior. We're going to start to see more pockets of rank 3 and potentially rank 4 fire with forecasted weather and winds. So if we leave this as is, it's going to be out of our control, and we're going to be just in this place where we're leaving it up to essentially Mother Nature to dictate, whether this has the potential to spot or cause us issues in the future. Now, if we can take advantage of favorable weather, which we have right now, and we can bring the fire's edge into terrain that's workable before we get these hot, dry conditions and before it gets windy, we are bringing the fire down to places we can action it on our own terms with a sense of kind of predictability and confidence there that this operation can be done safely with favorable conditions, rather than leaving it up to essentially chance that this fire stays in the right location given the winds and weather that we're expecting.
Sure, yeah. Can you tell me about what kind of ignitions are going to happen? Because typically, historically on this fire, we've been doing hand ignitions, but that's going to be different on this one.
Yes, this is going to be a combination of aerial ignitions and hand ignitions. So we will have a helicopter up in the air that will have essentially a plastic sphere dispenser is what we call it. It drops little ping pong sized balls that when they get injected with glycol, when they hit the ground, they have this timed ignition response, and they start little spot fires in the forest where they're dropped. So because this is about 300 to 350 hectares, it's way too large for just to do through hand ignitions. So what we do is we're going to burn the middle portions and a majority of this burn polygon aerially with a plastic sphere dispenser. And then once the fire gets close enough to the guards that we've constructed, that's when we'll have hand crews using hand torches to just clean up the edge of the fire and bring it slowly to containment lines, where we then have water delivery systems in place all around this, and then crews can start putting water on fire's edge and containing it.
Great, yeah. So that actually leads me into my next question. What resources are going to be in place to help this ignition be successful, and to help the community understand that we are preparing for it, and we are going to work on this to be as safe and successful as possible?
Yeah, great. So quite a contingency of ground resources. So we have 50 to 60 ground personnel between Type 1 BCWS resources and our contract community. So those are the folks that are going to be on every flank of this fire, that are doing a combination of either hand ignitions, or are going to be making sure the water delivery systems are running well, patrolling and monitoring, and as fire gets to the edge, making sure that they're there with water starting to cool the edge down. We then have an equipment strike team that's on site, on standby. So that's an excavator or 2 excavators and a dozer that are there, available, ready to respond to any spot fires that we may get. And same with 2 medium helicopters that are going to be on standby with buckets on, ready to respond to anything that we feel poses a threat to our containment lines. We also are working with a large contingent of structure protection resources that are pre-positioned at properties that are adjacent to the burn, that just to have a presence there. We already have structure protection systems set up in place for any values that we feel are at risk of this fire and of this ignition. And then we have a bunch of tenders and engines that are going to be, by the Sparwood transfer station and in some of these areas that are at the south end of Sparwood, just with having a presence there and making sure that we have the ability to respond to anything that we need to. So I think I've captured all resources there. We feel well prepared for this planned ignition with the resources that we have.
That's always good to hear, Dan. So I know that we were talking about the size of it. Is it possible to talk about maybe what you're expecting that residents can expect to see? And especially given the forecasted wind directions at the time, what areas are likely to be the most impacted by smoke?
Yeah. So what we're expecting for essentially winds on the ground tomorrow, they're going to be upslope. So when we start this planned ignition, people can expect to see smoke starting at the ridge top. And then as we bring slope down with the helicopter, they're going to just see that smoke get further and further down slope until it's at the base of the slope and we have ground crews igniting. At that point, as we have ground crews completing the ignition, that's when you're going to see the most smoke in the air. It is going to be upslope and up the ridge, and then from ridge top, it's going to be up into the air. Based on forecasts, it should rise to about 3,000 meters. And then it's gonna, that smoke column will then be slowly drifting to the south. So that is quite an elevation. We're not concerned about there being immediate impacts as we're burning. But in the overnight period, we tend to see smoke settle in the valleys. So as it gets later in the evening, and with our forecasted upper level winds pushing this smoke to the south, we could see areas like Hosmer down to Fernie experiencing some of the settled smoke from this planned ignition in the overnight period and into the next day, before we get enough daytime heating to kind of lift some of that smoke and some winds to transport that smoke out of the valley.
Thanks for that, Dan. It's always good for also the surrounding communities, the surrounding areas, to just be prepared and be aware that is a possibility. I have one last question for you. And I've completely lost it. Okay, I did have one last question for you. It was about the topography in the area, and if that was going to help actually with the ignition. With that, how fire likes to burn upslope.
Yeah. Yeah, the terrain and topography that we have for this ignition are very favorable. So the slope goes steeply off our eastern guard, which is the transmission line. It goes fairly steeply off of our southern connection line. That's a combination of heavy equipment and a hand line. And then it goes quite steeply off the line that we have on this Forest Service road up this west face. Steep slopes away from guards are our most favorable type of burning, because we're not just depending on wind to bring it the right direction. We know that fire is going to burn uphill, and so the terrain is really favorable for us. We're expecting that fire is just going to be burning upslope, assisted from some gradual upslope winds during the day, up to ridge top, and then elevating up to that 3,000-meter mark.
Awesome. And so this planned ignition could start as early as tomorrow. So that would be Sunday, August 13th. Is it going to be 1 day, 2 days? What's the plan? What do we have? Like, I mean, I know this is all dependent on site and weather forecast. So that's why we say as early as Sunday.
Yeah, thanks. So yeah, starting, all the pieces are in place. All the preparations are complete for this planned ignition tomorrow. The one thing that we need to make sure that we have tomorrow is that our fuel conditions and our fuel moisture are dry enough for us to consume the unburnt fuels. We're still recovering from that period of cooler, wetter weather. We need to make sure our fuels are dry enough that we get good enough consumption of those unburnt fuels so that they don't relight, or that we don't leave pockets of green fuel within the burn that then become a risk of reburning or burning when after the planned ignition. So we need to make sure that when we're burning this, we have good consumption rates, so that once it's complete, we know that it's contained and that there's no further risk of it spotting or burning again. So that's the one variable that we're looking at right now. Certainly the weather is in our favor. We're trying to take advantage of a window before it gets too hot and windy. The next 2 days are the most favorable days for that. So hopefully we can be successful with our fuel conditions tomorrow, in which case people will see smoke in the air and a planned ignition's occurring. If we don't have the right fuel conditions, we will start on Monday, which still looks like a favorable day for us to be doing planned ignitions, and it's still before we set into this period of really, really hot, dry weather and winds.
Awesome. Thanks so much for the update, Dan. I know that it helps everyone really get a full picture of what's going on, and of course, if anyone has any questions, they're free to contact the Southeast Fire Center information team for any details going forward. And Dan and I will be working together, or Dan and the information team will be working together to make sure that people are informed. Thanks so much,
Thanks,
Dan.
everyone. You bet.
Bye.
Thanks.